Shubka Kamath. I'm a PhD student with the School of Journalism and Mass Communication, and also one of the co-organizers of SARC, which is the South Asia Research Collective. We are an informal, yet starting to become a formal collective of graduate students, postdoc students, and postdoc fellows who work specifically in South Asia, and we are here to support each other and create awareness where we feel is important for the voices to be heard. Before we jump in, I want to give you a brief understanding of what the CAA is. The CAA stands for the Citizenship Amendment Act of 2019, which was passed by the Parliament on 11th December 2019 in India. Sorry. This specific act has amended the Citizenship Act of 1955 by providing a path of Indian citizenship for members of Hindu, Sikh, Buddhist, Jain, Parsi, and Christian religious minorities who have fled persecution from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Afghanistan before December 2014. Under this 2019 amendment, migrants who have entered India by 31st December 2014 and have suffered religious persecution or fear of religious persecution in their country of origin are made eligible for citizenship. The amendment also relaxes the residence requirement for naturalization of these migrants from 12 years to 6 years. But the most important thing to note here is that the Muslim section of the population from these countries has been entirely not been given any such eligibility, which makes this the first act where the first instance of religion being overtly used as a criteria for citizenship under Indian nationality law. Taking all of this into consideration and the rising involvement of the South Asian community here and back home in India, all of us at SARC, in association with the Center for South Asia and the Department of Asian Languages and Cultures, decided to conduct this panel, and our prompt for today, which is what our speakers are going to be talking about in their own perspectives, is with the integrity and well-being of India and its neighbors being the goal, what do you think is vital for all of us to understand about passing of the CAA in conjunction with the implementation of the National Register of Citizens and the National Population Register and the events that have unfolded since then? Each of the panelists will be given 9 minutes to speak, and we will have a 30-minute question answer session after. And I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker, Priyadarshi Amar, who is a PhD student from the Department of Political Science, and he will be talking about the evolution of the stance of political parties on the CAA and the NRC.
Hello everyone. I'm sorry I changed the title a little bit. I changed it to Politics and Citizenship in Assam and rest of India. Two reasons for this. Having grown in Hindi heartland, I have been blamed of not raising concerns of Northeast by my friends in Delhi University. So this is my apology to them. So it's Politics of Assam first and then rest of India. And the other reason is that someone has been telling us to remember chronology. So since NRC started for the first time in Assam, following the chronology, I am going to start with Assam and the next slide. So the first NRC happened in 1951, just after independence, and there can be many reasons for why it happened. I mean, the first question that comes to me is because of partition. We experienced partition just 4 years back. But partition was something which happened, which exposed other states also. But why was it only Assam which had to undergo NRC? And some roots of that is in the colonial migration policies. So in the plain regions of British Assam, there was huge encouragement of migration, and that changed the demography of those regions. While in the hilly regions, the Britishers had policies which protected the indigenous communities, and there was no change in the demography there. So it kind of led to a spatial divide, which led to an unease between the population of the plains and the hilly regions, and a feeling of dilution of Assamese culture. The language was strongly felt in the people from the indigenous regions, and which led to formation of two organizations which kind of led the movement for the rights of indigenous people. First was the All Assam Students Union, which was formed in 1966, and then came the political party. Some members of All Assam Students Union and other members formed a political party called the Assam Ganit Parishad, which the main purpose of this was to detect and deport undocumented immigrants, especially from the plain regions or the regions where the Brahmaputra flows. And after this formation of this party, there was a lot of movement going on, but there was no debate on NRC. There was a law which was introduced called the Prevention of Infiltration from Pakistan, and the powers was given to the local police to deport people who are considered illegal citizens, but there was no action on the ground. There was hardly any. There were some deportations, but they were very less in terms of the number of undocumented citizens. And later, this policy, the scheme was rolled back, and the people who study politics at that time call it appeasement politics of Congress, and it could be appeasement, it could be rational to kind of maintain the social harmony or the religious harmony of the region. Actually, in 1970, Guwahati High Court made a verdict in which it declared 1951 NRC not sufficient to guarantee citizenship to anyone. So this was completely made void. Then what happened? In 1978, the Congress party lost power in Assam for the first time. The Janta party came to power, and what they started doing is they started co-opting these players of the indigenous movement. They started co-opting members of All Assam Students Union and Assam Ganit Parishad, and gave them by promising them that they will be given a space in the parliament. Their demands will be made public in the parliament, and it will become a national issue. And that kind of started demands for updating NRC and a new NRC. But what really triggered the demand for new NRC was in 1979 there was a bipole re-election in the parliamentary constituency of Mangal Doi. So what happened is just before the election commissioner made a statement that there are 40,000 fake voters, and every player started making their own interpretation based on these statements. So the indigenous people assumed all these fake voters as undocumented migrants, and there are other Congress said these are not all undocumented migrants, these could be also other fake voters. And what happened is this kind of led to the decade of 80s, which is very violent in Assam, which led to a lot of these movements. It led to the formation of the extremist United Liberation Front for Assam, the ULFA, and this was very tense period in Assam. The infamous Nelly massacre happened in 1983. What happened in 1983 also was the party which led these indigenous, the political party which was formed by the group of indigenous people, Assam Ganit Parishad, came to power in 1983. And in 1985, they were able to get into a deal with the Rajiv Gandhi government on Assam Accord, where the Accord basically, what it does is it promises the people of Assam that all the undocumented immigrants would be identified, and there would be a way to deport them or to there would be a way to deport them. And this was the main statement of the accord. What happened was there was confusion about who is Assamese after that, and some political party said that used the 1951 NRC to define who is Assamese. But what happened is that the first NRC used completely was based on colonial laws. So was it right to use colonial laws to define who is Assamese? And there was this debate going on which delayed the updating of the NRC. In 2005, the Manmohan Singh government made a statement along with a few leaders of the All Assam Students Union that they're going to update the NRC. And just to keep in mind, in 2006, there was the Assam Assembly election and Congress was up for re-election. Then there was no work on that until 2010 when an official statement was made by the government, and actually not only a statement, the work actually was started in 2010 for the first time on updating the NRC. And this was again just before the 2011 general election. So what you can see is that political opportunism is almost trumping policy stance in all these mentions. And what happened is in 2013, Supreme Court gave strict orders, set up a timeline on when the NRC should be ready, and that led to after 2013 there was a change in government in the center, and that the government was very pro NRC, and they started the process with a lot of vigor. And in 2018 the final draft of NRC was released. So just to give you figures, there were 329 million people who applied for NRC, and out of that 19 million were left out. And just to look at the religious decomposition of those who were left out, 12 million were Hindus. And this kind of was, I think, something which the political parties in India was surprised by. That in so many numbers, there are these Hindu undocumented migrants who were left out. And this gave opportunity to some political parties to kind of try to make these undocumented citizens, while this was completely opposed by everyone who was part of the indigenous Assamese movement. This was against the Assam Accord, because the Assam Accord said that the cutoff date should be 1971, but the CAA made the date to be 2014 for making these undocumented immigrant citizens. So the next slide. So this is the brief about what happened in Assam. Next, on 8th January, the CAA was first introduced in Lok Sabha, and it easily cleared the floor test in Lok Sabha because there's a single party majority, and it was BJP was able to pass this bill. What happened is in Rajya Sabha, which is also the upper house. India is a bicameral system. There is an upper house, a lower house. The lower house is directly elected representatives, and the upper house is also called the Council of States, so members are nominated from the states. BJP was not in majority on its own, so it had to do some political negotiations to gain support to reach the halfway mark. And there were some parties, some regional parties, which usually try to support the government in the center, were able to support it. Now, given this, that BJP is not in majority in the upper house, if NRC goes to protest, will it survive? So to talk about that, I'm going to discuss about the stance of political parties in the next slide. So BJP, as we all know, was supportive of NRC, is supportive of a nationwide NRC, very supportive of CAA. Recently made statements that there has been no discussions of NRC yet, but it was mentioned in their manifesto in the recently concluded Jharkhand Assembly election. See, Shiv Sena, a key proponent of NRC, recently have declared that there won't be any NRC in Maharashtra. Indian National Congress has supported NRC in Assam, but opposes NRC in a nationwide NRC. Regional parties like Janata Dal United, Akali Dal, Telangana Rashtra Samiti have all changed their stance, and now almost all these parties are against NRC. Moving on, so if we just look at the change of stance and we just put them to numbers, it might happen that if it's today when the Rajya Sabha goes to vote on NRC, it might not pass the floor test. But the caveats to that I'm going to discuss in the next slide. So first, there's a lot of cheap talk which happens in Indian Parliament. He is Biren Prasad Vaishya, the MP of Assam Ganesh Parishad, which was, as I said, was one of the parties which came out of the movement in Assam, gave a fiery speech opposing CAA, and just a couple of hours later voted for CAA. just a couple of hours. And the reason was that there is a generational divide in the party. The older members of the party are against NRC, and the younger members closer to BJP are in favor of NRC. Moving on to my last slide. There's another question, whether there would be a flow test for NRC. There are claims that if there is no amendment required to the Citizenship Act to bring in NRC, Government of India can bring in executive order without having a flow test for NRC. And just to end, I would like to add one more point is that every 2 years, the composition of 1/3 of the members in Rajya Sabha retires, so the composition of Rajya Sabha also changes, which will again change whether the current ruling dispensation have enough powers to kind of win the flow test of NRC. On that note, I'm going to end my. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Our next speaker is Untitled. She is an LLM research-based student with the School of Law, and she's going to be talking about how the CAA violates the Constitution of India.
Hello everyone. So I'm going to discuss how CAA 2019 is in direct violation of our Constitution. First of all, what is CAA 2019? It allows certain illegal immigrants to apply for citizenship as long as they can meet 4 criteria. 1, they entered India before 31st of December 2014. 2, they got exemption from the Passports Act and Foreigners Act from the Union government. 3, they are from Afghanistan, Bangladesh, or Pakistan. 4, they are Hindus. 6, Christians, Parsis, Jains, or Buddhists. I think that this act is not only a gross violation of human rights and violates the Indian Constitution, but is also founded in colonial mind frame by thinking that Muslims are one large homogeneous bloc, and that religious persecution between one dominant sect and the lesser dominant sect is not worth an argument or worth our consideration. This conclusion can be reached because this act fails to provide equal protection to often religiously persecuted Ahmadi and Shia Muslims in Pakistan. The government of India has used the argument to provide safe havens to religiously persecuted minorities in countries, including Pakistan, but it clearly fails to do that one job correctly. Within the territories of India, Article 14 of the Indian Constitution talks about equality before laws and read as follows. The state shall not deny to any person, equality before the law or equal protection of the laws within the territory of India. In the case of Dasratha versus State of Andhra Pradesh, Supreme Court of India in 1961 laid down that equality contemplated by Article 14 and other cognate articles like Article 15 subsection 1 and Article 16 subsection 1 are not secured only by treating equals equally, but also by treating unequals unequally. This empowers positive discrimination on the part of the state. This judgment clearly directs the state to attain equality through equity, to bring the most marginalized to the same level as the ones with privilege and then treat them equally. In India, according to 2011 census, we have only 14.2% of Muslims in India right now. Such a report of 2006 says that while Muslim disadvantage has been widely noted, there are few policies and laws in place to protect them, and there has not been an effective political mobilization in their interest. Muslims are also frequent targets of discrimination and even violence. Therefore, it is clear that the people who need to be discriminated positively are the Muslims in India, not the Hindus, but the Muslims. This means that state is obligated to make policies and laws to elevate them and not oppress them further, as it violates right to equality enshrined to everyone under Article 14. Doing this honors the Constitution. Failing to do this fails the Constitution, but specifically and willfully working against the fundamental right can only be construed as malicious and is ultra-virus the Constitution of India. The state has resources to research and make laws and policies, and ignorance cannot be stated as an excuse. You have one job as a state, you are expected to do it correctly. This case law, which is E.V. Chennaya versus State of Andhra Pradesh, 2005, where Supreme Court laid down that a legislation may not be amenable to challenge on the grounds of violation of Article 14 if its intention was to give effect to Article 15 and 16, or when the differentiation is not unreasonable or arbitrary. Article 15 and 16 talk about prohibition of discrimination on the basis of race, caste, gender, religion, or place of birth in employment matters and access to public spaces. This access logically comes only when you are allowed to live in India, or in other words, you are a citizen of India, meaning you are not in a danger of deportation or banishment. These articles, however, clearly do not prevent the state from making laws for the advancement of educationally and socially less privileged classes in India. In India, Muslims occupy that place. The case also lays down that the differentiation made should not be unreasonable or arbitrary. CAA 2019, by specifically leaving Muslims unreasonably and arbitrarily out of the act, because data suggests that they are way more marginalized than Hindus in India, violates Article 14, 15, and 16 combined together. Since Article 14 uses the word any person, a person does not need to be a citizen in order to access this basic human right to equality before law. Therefore, people arguing that right to equality and equal protection under the law only protects citizens are wrong. CAA 2019 only works to reaffirm oppression in India. It therefore would not be inaccurate to label this act as an act of pure and thinly veiled oppression. The preamble of the Indian Constitution states that India is secular, and in that spirit, none of the fundamental rights in Indian Constitution allow any negative discrimination based on religion. Prohibiting a section of people because that religion goes against the very spirit of Indian Constitution. In the case of St. Xavier's College versus State of Gujarat, that was decided by Supreme Court of India in 1974, Supreme Court of India explained that India is neither anti-God or pro-God. It treats alike the devout, the antagonistic, and the atheist. It eliminates God from the matters of the state and ensures that no one shall be discriminated against on the grounds of religion. The essential features of this judgment are two in number. 1. Elimination of God from the matters of the state. 2. Brings all people under the umbrella of preamble protection. This means your caste, race, gender, religion, place of birth, or nationality should not matter. The Supreme Court of India in Keshavananda Bharti versus State of Kerala in 1973 clearly held that the preamble is a part of the Constitution. This means all legislations and acts are bound by the principles of the preamble, since CAA 2019 fails to embody the principle of secularism, it is ultra vires the Constitution or in violation of the Constitution in this regard as well. It stands in violation because it chooses to give citizenship status based on what God we pray to, and leaves the most oppressed out of the protection provided to everyone by the preamble. Therefore, in toto, CAA 2019 is a clear and direct violation of the Indian Constitution, is unfair to the most oppressed, is illogical as it does not do anything to combat oppression, but only transfers it from one section of the oppressed people to the another, as I do want to acknowledge that religious persecutions of Hindus in the neighboring countries is real and violates tenets of basic human rights and natural justice. In other words, CAA 2019 should never have been enacted, and the move to challenge its constitutionality in the Supreme Court of India is the most logical, fair, and just move. I would also like to point out that I am a Jamia Millia Islamia alumni, and I'm really proud of my university for peacefully protesting against CAA 2019. Next. A student's place is in the revolution, and we have an obligation to use our education and expertise to advance the rights of the most oppressed. Thank you.
with the Department of Mechanical Engineering, and he's going to be focusing on the historical and civilizational context of the CAA. We'll address some misconceptions and we'll discuss the nature of secularism in India.
Thank you for having me on this panel. So I'll start with the historical context and starting with the partition of India, which has a long philosophical history to it. But I'll start with the 1946 provincial elections. During these elections, the Indian Muslim League contested on the basis of the demand for a separate nation for Muslims, that is Pakistan. And it won 87% of the Muslim reserved seats in those elections. That basically established the claim of Muslims at that time to have a separate nation for them, that is Pakistan. When Congress was seen to be vacillating a bit, they used a direct action plan, which was basically a threat of violence as a negotiation tactic. During the direct action day, thousands were killed in Kolkata and later in Noakhali and Bihar too. Now this tactic as usual worked, and India was partitioned during independence. During and after independence, we again saw a lot of riots on both sides of the border. Now, after independence, India, in accordance with a civilizational ethos, decided to be a pluralist country and not discriminate on base of religion in its constitution. However, the same was not the case with Pakistan in East Pakistan, which is now Bangladesh. Afghanistan too is seen as an extended part of our civilization, although it's separated longer before. And there is a lot of migration between Pakistan and Afghanistan, especially after 1947. So there are discriminatory provisions in the constitutions there in all three countries. All these three countries have Islam as a state religion. There are discriminatory provisions in the constitution. For example, non-Muslims cannot become a head of state. There has been destruction of places of worship belonging to non-Muslims. There has been blatant land grabbing, especially in Bangladesh, targeted eviction and forced conversion of women, and also ethnic cleansing. Who can forget about the 1971 massacres in Bangladesh, which targeted both Hindus and Muslims, Bengalis. So it is in this context that we need to see the Citizenship Amendment Act. It is just 2 pages, although not many protesting have been reading it. But it's quite simple. The main clauses are limited to this much, and so it gives accelerated citizenship to the 6 minority religions in the 3 neighboring Islamic nations of Afghanistan, Bangladesh, and Pakistan. And it reduces the period of naturalization from 12 years to 6 years. More importantly, this applies only to people who have come to India before 2015. And hence they will now all get citizenship soon. I think this is a civilizational responsibility that India owes to these people in terms of what has happened in history and what is during partition and after partition. So very common problem to this has been like, what about Muslims facing persecution? As a couple of people here mentioned too, there can be Ahmadis or say Balochis in Pakistan who face oppression. There can be women or people from the LGBT community, or in general, anyone who wants to escape these 3 countries and say apply for citizenship in India. This law does not prevent that. I know in introduction, Kritika mentioned that it makes religion as a criteria for citizenship. It does not. It does not make religion a criteria for citizenship. It simply accelerates citizenship for a specific class of people on a specific rationale. And so Muslims are not blocked from citizenship in any way. For example, we all know the case of Adnan Sami, who got citizenship under the very same government, although he's a celebrity. But there have been hundreds of other Muslims from these 3 countries who have gotten citizenship under the very same government. So again, the next question has been, what about Muslim refugees or any refugees from other countries, say Tamils from Sri Lanka or Rohingyas from Myanmar? Again, repeating, CA is just a one-time measure for a specific class of people the 6 minorities from the 3 Islamic countries who came to India before 2015, and it does not prevent anyone else from being given citizenship from applying for citizenship. In the past, lakhs of Tamils have been given citizenship based on the situation in Sri Lanka. In the future, too, anyone who applies can be given citizenship based on case-to-case basis. And one important point that people miss is that this amendment is on the very safe assumption that the situation in these 3 countries is not expected to improve anytime soon. And this does not really apply for places like Sri Lanka or Myanmar, in my personal opinion. Whereas it is a very safe assumption for the 3 countries that are following. A very common thing that I saw on social media was that India is a poor country. Absolutely true. We are having economic problems. Again, true. Then how can we afford new citizens? This is again a moot point because this applies to people who are already in India before 2015. In fact, providing citizenship may enable them to be a part of the formal economy if they wish to do so. Another point is that then a strawman was erected about, oh, CA is not a problem, but CA plus NRC is a problem. If you are a Muslim and if you don't have documents, you have a problem. But if you are not a Muslim and if you don't have documents, you have CA. Why? So that's discrimination. But next slide. But that is not really true because CA is not really a safety net. It is based on a specific rationale. And for applying for citizenship under CA, you still have to prove, you provide certain documents that you belong to that class of people. And again, there has been a lot of assumptions based on the Assam NRC on what kind of documents are required, etc. But that NRC was totally mandated by the Supreme Court and controlled by the Supreme Court, the rules and everything. And the Home Minister is on record saying we'll learn from it. Basically, it's good to be skeptical about the NRC, ask questions, how it is going to be implemented, etc. But this plain rumor mongering and fear mongering that has been used to incite people is really wrong. Can you go? So I wanted to talk about the violent protests and the criticism of the police action, and then also the blatant anti-Hindu nature of the protests in terms of the iconography and the sloganeering. But I don't have that much time. But I think this is really important. I think a lot of protests, what they did was they read the preamble of the Constitution to mark their protest, saying, oh, this is against the Constitution, so we'll symbolically read the preamble. Ankita also mentioned the word secular in the preamble, which is often done in these protests. They cite the word secular in the preamble and say, look, secularism means equal treatment of all religions. How can you do this? But it is really amusing and ironic because the current preamble was modified from the original preamble in 1976 using the 42nd Amendment during the period of emergency. So it's really amusing that that word secular and socialist, which were added during that period, are now being cited to call this government fascist. So that's the original preamble. In fact, Dr. Ambedkar categorically refused to enter the words socialist and secular into the preamble of the Constitution because he believed that he does not want to impose this on the people. It was decided by the Constituent Assembly that India will be a pluralist country, but secularism means something very more specific. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. Finally, talking about positive discrimination, in India we still have separate personal laws for Hindus and Muslims. Any effort to enact a uniform civil law is being resisted. Only Hindu temples in India can be controlled by the state. No other religion's place of worship can be controlled by the state in India. That's our secularism. We have Article 30 of the Constitution, which rears its ugly head in several forms, one of them being the Right to Education Act, which was passed during UPA 1. It sets certain norms and regulations for schools to be followed and quotas. That does not apply to religious minority institutions. There are other questions such as how to define a religious minority. For example, even in West Bengal, where the Muslim population is very high, they are a minority. Even in the Kashmir Valley, Muslims would be a minority because the minority status is declared centrally. Thousands of crores of scholarship are given based on religious minority status. The reason I'm mentioning all this is not to say that since we are doing all this, we are supposed to discriminate against Muslims. No, not at all. In fact, all this needs to be discussed and reversed. But when the minorities of our neighboring countries actually need our help, then we say, oh, ignore history, ignore radicalism, ignore what is the socio-political situation. Just remember one word, secularism, and the narrow definition that you put that in. Thank you.
Our fourth speaker is Tusha Chanda. She is a PhD student with the Department of Consumer Science and the School of Human Ecology. And she's going to be talking about the nature of the protests that are happening in India right now, the role of students and women in leading these protests, how forming an opposition to the government is important, and reclaiming the nationalist identity. Thank you, Kamila. Can anybody hear me?
No.
So I'm going to talk about the resistance that NRC, NPR, and CAA have been facing. I'm going to present a somewhat different perspective on the violent protests that Guru cited just now.
Can you all hear her? Not really.
Yeah, I want to not make you see that cookie picture as much as possible. So, in recent years, India has seen a steady disintegration in opposition to the majority, which has become even clearer in the light of the CAA and NRC debacle. Political parties in the opposition seem too divided on the issue themselves, as Priyadarshi rightly pointed out. While most of the public anger is usually directed towards the complete uselessness of the Congress and its current leadership, other parties have been back and forth as far as this issue is concerned. Some of them have voted in favor of the CAA when it was passed in the parliament, but backtracked later in the face of public outrage. A few took a strong stance against the legislation in the wake of the Jamia violence, but their anger seems to have fizzled out since. The judiciary, along with other independent institutions like the CBI, has shown an alarming tendency to bend to the will of the government. Although several lawmakers have registered their protest against CAA and NRC as part of the civil society, the judgments coming from the Supreme Court in recent times have overwhelmingly played to the ruling party's political rhetoric. The mainstream Indian media has long given up the pretense of acting as the fourth pillar of democracy, but rather play the role of a second wing of the BJP's IT cell. Having lost all semblance of ethical and professional journalism, they mainly function to further the politics of hatred being spewed by the ruling party. The most prominent public figures have chosen to remain quiet or endorse the establishment. It may even be safe to say that the more powerful the person is, the more likely they will keep their mouth shut or support the government in whatever it does. It was this vacuum that the disengaged, self-centered millennials stepped up to fill, the Constitution in her hand and the national anthem on her lips. What started out as a minority movement against the government in the Northeast was transformed into a movement of the civil society overnight in the wake of the Jamia and ANU violence. The spontaneity and enthusiasm of the students was infectious, and it was able to permeate every fabric of Indian society. I don't like the word political, I would rather say disengaged, or otherwise. The dynamicity in the students' struggle and lack of central leadership made it hard for the government to employ its usual labels of anti-nationals and urban Naxals to the protesters. The fact that students of private institutions and the IITs and IINs, places where the government would not have expected resistance from, got involved with equal zeal did not help either. The NRCCAA provided a vent for the anger that had been simmering among students for a very long time against continued repression of student voices in educational institutions, lack of employment opportunities, and privatization of higher education. It is interesting to note that the typical anti-NRCCAA activist is a first-time protester and belongs to the third or fourth generation after independence with no first-hand experience of the freedom struggle as such. As they rediscover the freedom struggle through these protests, they have also taken up the task of redefining the Indian identity as enshrined in the Constitution. While Ladira, Aishi and Aisha became icons of resistance against the Delhi police, hundreds of mothers came out in support of them and their fellow protesters, appalled by the violence they saw on television screens inside their homes. The Shaheen Bagh protests have been going on 24/7 for over a month now and have inspired similar protests all over the country, in Kolkata, Lucknow, Ranchi and elsewhere. The image of women at the front lines is reassuring and encourages more women to join in and continue with the ongoing protests. The reasons the protests have struck a chord with India's women are multifaceted. Women are likely to suffer disproportionately from the CAA, which requires certain documents to provide citizenship. Across India, women generally tend to have less documentation, to be poorer, more excluded from the ambit of official administration, often don't have their names on property documents, have frequently moved away from where they were born to get married, and are less likely to have their births registered. As a renowned lawmaker Kaunan Nadi put it, and I quote, "Being a woman in India feeds into the experience of and resistance to oppression. We know exclusion, and we know it viscerally." End quote. The Shaheen Bagh protesters have overwhelmingly put forward a message of unity and secularism and securing a better future for their children. The resistance is not merely against this particular legislation, but the toxic masculinity that Hindutva embodies. The leadership of women and students have encouraged other sections of the society to speak up. A number of eminent persons, including retired bureaucrats and military generals, raised their voice and recorded protests by relinquishing government assignments and surrendering documents of any recognition by the government. Academics like Romila Thapar, Irfan Habib, Prabhat Patnaik, and others have written an open letter to all the non-BJP chief ministers requesting them to refuse implementation of CAA, NPR, and NRC unitedly. The JNU violence even forced a bit of mainstream Bollywood out on the streets. Despite the sheer magnitude, absence of central leadership, yet myriad provocations, the protests have been successful in maintaining peace and non-violence. The protesters armed themselves with files and listened in the face of water cannons and tear gas, writing, singing, and chanting slogans of Azadi. In Shaheen Bagh, children are provided with daycare as their mothers sit on an indefinite demonstration, and every person who stops by in solidarity is offered a bite to eat. Moreover, the protesters have resorted to democratic means to address all the flag they have drawn from the ruling party and its supporters, sending defamation notices to curb false propaganda where the government has fallen woefully short to justify certain remarks on its part. From the day they started, these civic protests were marked by lusty wavings of the national tricolour, public readings of the preamble to the Constitution, and the singing of the national anthem. The presence of national symbols and icons is simultaneously marked by an absence of religious and sectarian symbols. This points to a critical shift in the form and manner of civic protests and democratic engagement in India's public spaces. It is this willful choice which makes the tricolour and the national anthem such a natural fit in these protests, unlike a forced effort to place a tricolour among a sea of party or religious flags. Moreover, the Constitution, as the intermediary, has provided the metaphor for members of all classes, castes, communities, and demographics to join these protests. These larger solidarities are at the heart of the optimism, creativity, and enthusiasm witnessed on the streets. It reinforces the political argument that citizenship and democracy belong together, naturally compatible, and mutually complementary. The battle is hard and likely quite long, with no end in sight yet, but I like to believe that maybe this time we have got our priorities right as a nation, and we're going to see it through to the end.
Our fifth speaker
speaker is Aman Abhishek, who is a PhD student with the School of Journalism and Mass Communication. He will be talking about the CAA with a focus on caste and Muslim refugees coming to India.
So I hope all of you can hear me. You can't hear me at all?
Kind of.
Is it better now? Can you hear me? At the back? Okay, so I'll be talking about two things. One is refugees coming to India from neighboring countries in South Asia, and the other one is caste and CAA. For the first, I would like to start by telling you that India is home to around 300,000 refugees from 28 different countries. And as Mukul was pointing out, we should be aware of the history and the historical context of refugee crisis in the South Asian region, and we definitely should be. We should be worried for our neighbors who need help. So let's start by a case of Rohingya genocide in Myanmar, neighboring Myanmar, to truly understand how the world's largest democracy deals with one of the most prosecuted minorities in the country, in the world. And the utility of looking at this case is realizing the significance of not allowing minorities from non-Muslim majority countries to come to India. So Myanmar is not a Muslim majority, and Rohingya Muslims who are being prosecuted, there is a genocide happening, and 700,000 Rohingya Muslims have been chased away from their homes. Most of them have entered Bangladesh, and many of them have come to India. So in my opinion, I think this is a pretty alarming situation if you care about numbers. If you care about numbers, then what's happening with Uyghur Muslims in China is a very alarming situation. Up to 2 million Uyghur Muslims are being put into concentration camps and labor camps. We should be worried about them. We should also be worried about the Hindus that are getting prosecuted, of course. We should be worried about anyone who's getting prosecuted. So let's start with Myanmar, because that's a big crisis. It's a big humanitarian crisis. So Rohingyas have come to India in 3 waves, starting from 1970, then again in the second wave 2012, and then 2017. In 2017, the BJP said that Rohingya were living illegally in the country and that they're going to deport them. They're going to make a plan, deport these people out. Over 16,000 Rohingyas have been registered as refugees by the UNHCR based on an exhaustive process. I mean, this is not a joke. It takes many months, many years, and there's an interview at the end. And after that, they were granted a refugee status by UNHCR. But India is not a signatory to the 1951 Refugee Convention of the UNHCR, so it does not recognize the refugee status that has been given to these people. And the refugee status is otherwise supposed to protect them from harassment, arbitrary arrests, detention, and deportation, but the Indian government doesn't care. So that's so much for your Atati Devo Bhava right there. But that said, even if it hasn't signed the 1951 Refugee Convention, India cannot deport these people back to Myanmar. India cannot deport Rohingyas back to Myanmar because there is this principle of non-refoulement, which means you cannot send people back to the country where you know they came from, and if you send them back, they will be prosecuted again. But I guess nobody cares. So India and China, the geopolitics which we should care about is that India and China are competing to woo the Myanmar government, and both of them are saying that we're going to fight terrorism, the whatever Islamophobic line all across the globe. And the current Home Minister, Amit Shah, calls Rohingya refugees as termites, not once, but on many occasions. So yes, we do care a lot about our prosecuted neighbors. In April 2018, there was a fire in Delhi's Rohingya camps, which razed the entire camp to the ground. These people are already on the margins of the society, and then they lose all their belongings. And then, after the fire, a member of the youth wing of the BJP tweeted saying, yes, we burned the houses of Rohingya terrorists. And the next day he tweeted, yes, we did it, and we will do it again. # Rohingya quit India. And then the account was deleted. And since then, there have been 3 such fires in 3 years. We don't know who caused them. There is no investigation. Nobody cares. The Rohingya refugees in India are under massive and really heavy surveillance. In Haryana, they cannot leave their camps even if they can afford to live elsewhere. They have to constantly report to authorities what they're doing. If they have a guest, they have to make a phone call explaining what the guest is doing in their house, like what are they up to, where do they come from, and so on. Previous Home Minister Rajnath Singh had asked state governments to identify and collect biometrics on all Rohingya, so we should thank Aadhaar card. And I'll leave it to that. But then one important thing that's going to happen in the coming decades is climate crisis. Climate crisis is going to hit Bangladesh really hard. The Bangladesh-Indian border is extremely porous. There is going to be probably, I mean, we can only guess what the future entails. There is probably going to be a massive influx of refugees from Bangladesh to India for very understandable reasons, and for a crisis that we've collectively created. But these kind of laws, which have all these accelerated citizenship and whatnot, don't recognize that crisis is crisis. It doesn't, like when climate crisis hits, it hits. So that's going to be really difficult to deal with. So moving on to the second part of my talk, I wanted to touch upon caste and CA, and what I think is that laws matter, but they also don't matter because of the way this law operates. So the burden of proof of showing the state that you're a citizen falls on the citizen, which means that this is what it looks like. You're living somewhere, you get a notice saying that you have to show up many miles away with documents and prove that you're a citizen. If you don't show up, that's on you, then you're in trouble, you're not on the citizen list. If you don't have the money, that's your problem. And even if laws are not discriminating against you, even if you're not a Muslim, you're a Hindu, but you are poor, you're a Dalit, which is what I'm getting to. You don't have access to legal mechanisms to fight that legal battle, to put your name back in there. So let's talk about Dalits, which are 170 million in number, and the Indian diaspora doesn't, like, the situation is so bad, you can talk, like, just look around you and try to figure out how many Brahmins and Banyas are sitting in this room, and how many Dalits are in this room, and if you have Indian friends, you can try to figure out what the situation looks like. But let me give you some explicit examples of how bad the situation is and how brutal and systematic the oppression is at an institutional level and at an interpersonal level. So when Modi got in September an award from the Gates Foundation for the Clean India Mission, hours after that, 2 kids, 10 and 12 years old, were beaten to death for defecating in public. I mean, the irony of that is huge. These kids were Dalits. They were beaten by upper caste Hindus for defecating in public when Modi is claiming that 96% of the country is open defecation free, and Gates gave him an award. I mean, I don't know, like, I'm smiling at the irony, but I shouldn't be smiling. So according to official statistics, the crimes committed against Dalit, the crimes are committed against Dalits every 18 minutes. Hacking off limbs, being burnt alive, being stoned to death are common practices. 2% conviction rate. That's what we have against the most stringent law that we have, which is Prevention of Atrocities Act. The crimes have increased significantly over time. Neoliberal India hasn't emancipated us. If the crimes happen, when the crimes happen, they don't get reported. If they get reported, they don't get registered. If they get registered, cases don't go on trial. If they go on trial, you have 2% conviction rate under POA. And quickly, just the institutional bias. The point is that the institutional bias against Dalits and lower castes is so huge that it's hard to wrap your head around it. There were 2 cases of brutal rapes in December that got a lot of media attention, as it should. And what wasn't talked about was that in the UP case, the person who was burnt alive as she was going to the lawyer for fighting a case of rape, she was burnt alive by upper caste men. Okay, and these upper caste, one of them was the person that she had a romantic relationship with earlier, and the upper caste men's family did not approve the relationship for obvious reasons. And she accused them of rape, which happened multiple times in her report. The police wouldn't report the case. Finally, she threatened the police by saying that I'm going to end my life if you don't act on this complaint that I've registered. And the police acted, and these upper caste men were thrown in jail. They were let out on bail in two and a half months. They came out and they burned her alive. So that's that, and the entire village, which is very appropriately called Hindu Nagar, is divided along caste lines, where people are saying that she must have burnt herself alive because the guy didn't want to marry her. So, like the whole, like you're expecting these Dalits to first have the documents and then to go and deal with this institutional, whatever it is, and to be able to prove to use like these laws. Like they don't have the resources or the time to do this. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
And our last speaker is Moshe Ulala, who is a PhD student from the Department of Economics. He's going to be discussing India's current economic condition, the affordability of the implementation of these policies, an amalgamation of different costs that are harming individual productivity, and the causal link between immigration and economic productivity.
Can everyone hear me? Great. So I'm a PhD candidate at the Department of Economics, and I work in the economics of discrimination. I also work on policy evaluations, and as an economist, the first view of economics in understanding a policy is to understand potential benefits and potential costs, and then trying to come to an understanding whether a policy is good for a country or a nation or a society in general. Today I want to talk mostly about the CAA and the NRC in conjunction, more primarily about the NRC. My esteemed panelists have spoken a lot about CAA. I want to talk about these two through the lens of policy and trying to understand the benefits and the costs of this policy. So first, to talk about the benefits of the policy, I think as the CAA is, it opens doors to certain groups of individuals who have been persecuted in different countries. Standard economics says that immigration, this is where I want to clarify a little bit of doubts on immigration and economic productivity that is there usually. There is empirical evidence that increased immigration usually improves economic productivity of a country. The idea is simple, that it improves, it increases competitiveness, and for which economic productivity goes up. There has been evidence on the fact of immigration in Texas, where using data they have shown that both legal and illegal immigrants have both lower incarceration and criminal conviction rates than Native American ones. Abhijit Vinayak Banerjee and Esther Duflo, the Nobel Prize winning economists of this year, have cited heavily on the evidence of increased low-skill immigration to have not much effect on other low-skill migrants of the current country. So one thing that I want to say at the outset is CAA just by itself can improve economic productivity, but the question is, can we do better, right? Because as economists, the first question is about optimal policy decision making, right? And if a law by itself does not allow, or does not allow fast track citizenship for a certain group of people, then by itself it is economically inefficient. Because if an individual from a Muslim community can prove from another country that they have been either persecuted or they are facing difficulties in their lives, and if they can add to economic productivity of a country, why should we not be welcome? It defies economic logic. More so importantly, I want to say is that if illegal immigration is that important, the borders can be better reinforced, and that can be achieved at hundreds and thousands of fractions of lower costs than what it will be required to implement the CAA and the NRC. Now to talk about the costs of these two policies, we need to think about what the current state of the Indian economy is. And here I want to draw the work of Arvind Subramaniam and Josh Feldman at Harvard University, who have worked extensively on the Indian economy and how we are doing and what can be done. So currently, in the second quarter of 2019-20, we are growing at the rate of 4.5%. To put the number in perspective, a year back, this number was at 8%, right? And whenever usually in media these numbers are floated, in statistics when we estimate a number, it comes with a confidence interval. That means that how precise this number is, right? And with 4.5%, the thing is that the confidence interval is quite large, and that brings into question that is this number an overestimate or an underestimate. And the point is that over here we look at other economic indicators to understand whether it is an overestimate or an underestimate. So to look at other economic indicators, imports are down by 6%, investments or capital goods in industry is down by 10%. Consumer goods production in 2017-18 was growing at 5%, and now in the last quarter of 2019-20 is growing at 1%. Tax revenue, direct tax revenues, which were growing at 16% in 2017-18, are growing at 0% in 2019-20, and these are inflation adjusted. Export growth rates are growing negatively at negative 1% when we are growing at 9%. The reason why I say all these things is because with the NRC in place, the thing is that there is a huge documentation proof that every individual has to do, irrespective of religion, right? And the point is that when the economy is doing so badly, and the economy needs boost primarily in the agricultural sector, where most of the poor people of India are actually involved in, the numbers estimated now is around 61.5% of Indians are actually in the rural sector. So with this perspective, I want to say that here, with the economy growing so badly, and the push factor that needs to come from the government or the ones who are at the helm of the Economic Advisory Board needs to come to that sector of people on whom the burden of documentation proof is the highest. The ability to prove citizenship, to show documents for any middle class or upper class or high income individual in India is relatively much easier than for the poorer section, and that is more than 60 to 70% of individuals. To put some numbers in perspective, so the Indian Human Development Survey is a nationally representative survey of India, and in the 2005 survey, I was looking just at numbers of basic identity documents. Although the NRC's requirement is much higher, 33.6% of individuals do not know when they were born. In a country where 70% of individuals are in rural sector, 34% of them do not know where they were born. We are asking, a law is coming to us to show documents that they owned land before a certain particular day. That is going to put immense burden on an individual whose economic productivity is required, because those economic productivity together is what brings the country up together. So the primary, in an informal economy, it's the burden of proof is extremely high. So, and now I want to talk a little bit about indirect costs. So like the cost of getting documents we already spoke about, but then there is another psychic cost of being questioned of whether you're a citizen or not, right? It is widely documented in psychology that if you have psychic costs, then it reduces your productivity. In most of social sciences and also in economics also, where we are working in something which we call behavioral economics and neuroeconomics, we try to work together with economics and psychologists. And with increased psychic cost, we see that individual productivity is down. Since the burden of documentation is so high, bureaucratic bribes are an inevitability. You cannot escape that in our country. I want to focus also on the cost of litigation, right? And the burden of litigation on the judiciary. Some numbers to put things in perspective. Only in Assam, around 7,836 crores were spent on legal costs for hearings for those who are left out of asylum. What does this number mean, right? So this number effectively means that on average, individuals who are left out of the NRC had to spend around 20,000 rupees for legal costs. The census of India, and these are numbers from the government, the average annual income per capita of Assamese is 67,000 rupees. If you take out 20,000 out of it, you are left with 48,000 annually. That is about $700. So imagine the burden that we are putting on individuals who are living in our country. Finally, I want to talk a little bit about exclusionary policies and how exclusionary policies can cause a discriminatory narrative. To do this, I want to draw a parallel to a policy in the United States, which has been widely studied by fellow economists. My friends have also worked on this here, and this is zoning in the United States, right? What is zoning? Zoning effectively puts legal restrictions on particular neighborhoods of what kind of houses you can build. So, like for example, if you were to build, like my previous advisor in the economics department, he was living in California in 1975, where in a place they had to have a swimming pool, right? So the idea of these zoning policies have been believed to be discriminatory, even though you have no mention of race in it. The point is that by these policies are correlated with income, right? You cannot build a house in a place with a pool, then you need to be really rich. And the idea was to separate out or segregate black individuals or African American individuals. And this has been widely studied by economists, and that this causes discriminatory practices and it causes a discriminatory narrative. The point is that with the CAA is that even though with immigration, opening up immigration to certain individuals, that's really good. The point is that we can do better, right? We can open it up to anyone who is in need, right? As is in all other countries, right? The point is that like we need to understand who can add towards economic productivity and who is in dire need of having refuge in a country, and that is what the law should be based upon. Given the current situation of the Indian economy and the current law that is there, with the kind of documentation that is required for the NRC, it's just bad economics.